The December rain hammered the pavement outside the Magnolia Grand Hotel as I knelt beside the service elevator, my hands shaking as I felt for my daughter's pulse. Kate's head was bleeding, her event coordinator badge torn from her jacket and lying in pieces on the floor. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment. "Preston Webb," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "He said people like us. We're just the help. We don't get to ask questions." Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp in my arms. "I'm Ruth Brennan. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 42 years cleaning rooms at Charleston's finest hotels. My daughter Kate is 38, and she'd worked her way up from front desk clerk to lead event coordinator at the Magnolia Grand. It was supposed to be her dream job. She was supposed to be safe. But I knew Preston Webb. Or rather, I knew his family. Kate met Preston 2 years ago when he bought the Magnolia Grand from the previous owners. She was so proud, showing me the press release on her phone. "Mom, he's transforming historic hotels all over the South. He wants to preserve Charleston's heritage while bringing modern luxury. Isn't that wonderful?" I'd looked at his picture in the article. That smile, those eyes, cold, calculating, but wrapped in Southern charm, just like his father, just like his grandfather. "Be careful around him, honey," I'd said. "Mom, he's my boss. He's professional. He's actually really kind to the staff." But I'd seen that kind of kindness before. I knew what it meant. I knew what men like Preston Webb thought of people like us. For the first year, everything seemed fine. Kate worked long hours, coordinating weddings, corporate events, charity galas. The Magnolia Grand's reputation soared under Preston's ownership. Kate got a small raise. She seemed happy. Then things started changing. She'd come to my apartment looking tired, stressed. "The housekeeping staff is complaining," she told me one evening. "They're working double shifts, but their paychecks don't reflect the overtime. When they ask about it, they're told there must be a clerical error. But it keeps happening." "Have you talked to Preston?" I asked. "I tried. He said he'd look into it, but nothing's changed. And Mom," she hesitated, "some of the women have told me things. About him, about how he corners them in supply closets, how he makes comments about their bodies, how he's offered promotions if they're nice to him." My blood ran cold. "Kate, you need to document everything." "I am. I've been keeping records. I've talked to HR, but HR reports directly to Preston. I even found financial discrepancies in the payroll system." "Mom, I think he's been doing this for years, at all his properties. Then you need to go to the authorities." "I don't have enough proof yet. I need more before I—" "Kate, listen to me." I grabbed her hands. "These people, they're dangerous. Do you remember what I told you about working for families like the Webbs, about how they protect their own?" She'd pulled away. "This is different, Mom. This is illegal. He can't just get away with it because he's rich." But I knew better. I'd seen it happen before. That was 3 months ago. Then yesterday, I got the call from Charleston Memorial Hospital. Now I sat in the ICU waiting room, my sister Diane beside me. Kate was in surgery for a skull fracture and internal bleeding. The police had been here, asking questions. The hotel's security footage from the service elevator hallway was corrupted. Preston Webb claimed he wasn't even at the hotel when it happened. He had witnesses, lawyers. Everything lined up perfectly for him. "Ruth," Diane said quietly, "we can't let him get away with this." I looked at my sister. At 68, Diane's hands were gnarled from arthritis, but her eyes were sharp. She'd worked as a bookkeeper at the old Wentworth Hotel for 30 years before it closed. She knew numbers. She knew patterns. "Do you remember what Mama documented?" I asked. Diane's face went still. "The service logs." "Yes. Ruth, those are over 20 years old. Mama's been gone for 15 years. But you kept them, didn't you?" Diane nodded slowly. "In the storage unit. All of them." I couldn't bring myself to throw away her work. Our mother, Sarah Brennan, had started working as a housekeeper at Charleston's luxury hotels in 1968. She cleaned rooms at the Wentworth, the Harborview, the Battery House. She was invisible, just another black woman in a white uniform, changing sheets and scrubbing toilets for families who never learned her name. But Mama saw everything, and she wrote it all down. She'd learned early that the wealthy families who owned these hotels played by different rules. She'd seen maids fired when they got pregnant. She'd seen kitchen staff deported when they complained about wages. She'd seen young women, girls really, pressured into situations they couldn't escape, and she'd seen how the system protected these men over and over again. So she started keeping records. In her neat, careful handwriting, she documented every incident: dates, times, names, what was said, what was done. She noted discrepancies in paychecks. She copied financial documents left carelessly in wastebaskets. She photographed bruises on coworkers who were too afraid to go to the police. For 35 years, she collected evidence. She never did anything with it. The system protects the powerful, baby, she told me when I was young. But one day, maybe someone will need this. Someone who's brave enough to use it. When she passed in 2010, Diane had boxed everything up. Dozens of notebooks, folders of photocopied documents, envelopes of photographs. We talked about throwing it away, but something stopped us. "It's time," I said to Diane now. "Are you sure?" Preston Webb's grandfather owned the Wentworth in the 1970s and 82nds. His father took it over in the 92nds. I looked it up after Kate told me about the job. It's the same family, Diane. The same pattern. Diane pulled out her phone. "I'll get the storage unit key. You stay with Kate." While Kate was in surgery, I sat in that horrible fluorescent waiting room and I thought about my mother, about all those years she'd spent invisible, overlooked, dismissed, about how she'd turned that invisibility into power. Preston Webb thought he was untouchable. His family had always been untouchable, but he didn't know about the notebooks. Kate survived the surgery. The doctor said she'd need months of recovery, maybe longer. There was memory loss, confusion. She couldn't remember what had happened in that elevator. Couldn't remember confronting Preston. Couldn't remember gathering evidence. The police closed their investigation after 2 weeks. Insufficient evidence of foul play. Likely an accident. But I knew. And Diane knew. We met at my apartment 3 days after Kate came home from the hospital. Diane brought 6 banker boxes filled with our mother's documentation. We spread it across my dining room table, and we started reading. The notebooks went back to 1968. Mama's early entries were tentative, uncertain, but over the years, her documentation became meticulous, methodical. She'd created a system, cross-referencing incidents with financial records, with staff schedules, with hotel ownership changes. Preston's grandfather, Theodore Webb Sr., appeared throughout the 1970s notebooks. Mama had documented his pattern of hiring young immigrant women as housekeepers, then threatening deportation when they complained about unwanted advances. She'd noted payroll irregularities, systematic wage theft disguised as fines for minor infractions. Preston's father, Theodore Webb Jr., took over the Wentworth in 1989. The pattern continued, evolved. More sophisticated financial manipulation. Shell companies that made tracking money difficult. A network of managers who covered for each other, who silenced complaints, who made problems disappear. And then we found the envelopes. Mama had labeled them by year. Inside were photocopies of financial documents, handwritten notes from hotel management meetings, even photographs. She must have taken them when she was cleaning offices late at night, when the executives assumed no one was paying attention. "Ruth," Diane said, her hands trembling as she held a folder from 1994. "This shows systematic wage theft across 3 hotels, hundreds of employees. Over a decade." We kept reading. We found documentation of labor violations, tax fraud, money laundering through hotel renovations, payoffs to local officials to ignore building code violations. The Webb family had built their luxury hotel empire on exploitation, corruption, and the silence of people who had no power to fight back. Until now. "We need a lawyer," I said. "Someone who specializes in labor law, employment discrimination, financial crimes." "We need the FBI," Diane corrected. We found both. The lawyer's name was Jessica Chen. She was 42, sharp as a knife, and she'd grown up in a family of restaurant workers who'd been cheated by their employers. When we showed her Mama's notebooks, when we explained about Kate, when we laid out the evidence of decades of crimes, she didn't hesitate. "This is prosecutable," she said. "Statute of limitations might be an issue for some of the older incidents, but for the financial crimes, we have a longer window. And if we can show a continuing pattern, a conspiracy that's still active, we can bring this to the Department of Justice." She made calls. Within a week, we were sitting in a conference room with 3 FBI agents who specialized in white-collar crime and labor trafficking. They listened to our story. They examined the notebooks. They studied the financial documents Mama had copied so carefully, so secretly, 40 years ago. "Mrs. Brennan," the lead agent said, "your mother documented what amounts to a criminal enterprise spanning 5 decades. If we can verify this information, if we can connect it to current operations—" "My daughter was hospitalized 3 weeks ago after confronting Preston Webb about ongoing wage theft and sexual harassment at the Magnolia Grand," I said. "The pattern hasn't stopped. It's just continued into the next generation." They opened an investigation that same day. The FBI works slowly, carefully. They don't rush. They build cases brick by brick, document by document. They started verifying Mama's records, cross-referencing them with tax filings, employment records, corporate documents. They discovered that Preston Webb owned 7 luxury hotels across South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina. They found evidence of the same patterns at all of them. They interviewed former employees. Many were afraid at first, but when they learned others were speaking up, that there was protection, the stories started pouring out. Women who'd been harassed, threatened, assaulted, workers who'd been cheated out of wages for years, immigrants who'd been exploited because they feared deportation. The investigation took 9 months. Kate slowly recovered. The memory of that day never fully came back, but she didn't need it. She had the documentation she'd been gathering, and now she had the courage to share it. She gave her records to the FBI. She testified about what she'd discovered, about the retaliation she'd faced, and she learned about what her grandmother had done. I'll never forget the day I showed Kate the notebooks. She sat in my living room, carefully turning pages filled with Mama's handwriting, reading about incidents from before Kate was even born. Reading about women who'd suffered in silence, who'd had nowhere to turn, who'd trusted that someone, someday, would care. "Grandma did this?" Kate whispered. "All of this? For all those years?" "She wanted someone to have the truth," I said. "She knew the system wouldn't protect us, but she also knew that one day, the truth might matter." Kate cried. Then she straightened her shoulders. "We're going to finish what she started." In September, the FBI raided all 7 of Preston Webb's hotels simultaneously. They seized financial records, computers, security footage. They arrested Preston, his CFO, his director of operations, and 3 hotel managers who'd been part of the conspiracy. The indictment was 187 pages long. It detailed financial fraud, tax evasion, wire fraud, labor trafficking, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. It cited evidence spanning from 1972 to 2024. And on page 43, there was a footnote crediting documentation provided by Sarah Brennan, housekeeper, 1968 to 2003. Mama's name. In a federal indictment. Her work, her courage, her silent witness finally recognized. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Preston's lawyers tried everything. They claimed the old documentation was unreliable, that it was impossible to verify events from 50 years ago. They attacked Mama's credibility, called her an embittered employee with an agenda. But Jessica Chen was ready. She showed the jury how Mama's records matched up with tax documents, with employment records, with testimony from dozens of former employees. She demonstrated the pattern, the systematic nature of the crimes, the way it had been passed down from grandfather to son like a family business. And when Preston took the stand, when he was confident and charming and insisted he'd done nothing wrong, Jessica pulled out a photograph. It was from 1989. A young Preston, maybe 12 years old, at his father's hotel. In the background, barely visible, was Mama in her housekeeper uniform. On the back, in her handwriting, Theodore Jr., teaching his son the business. The boy watched his father proposition Maria in the supply closet. He smiled. Preston's face went white. "Mr. Webb," Jessica said quietly, "you've been doing this your entire life, haven't you? Because you learned from the best. Because you thought people like Sarah Brennan, like Ruth Brennan, like Kate Morgan didn't matter. Because you thought you were invisible to us. But you were wrong. We saw everything. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. They found Preston Webb guilty on 43 counts. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. His hotels were seized. His assets were frozen. A victims' compensation fund was established for the hundreds of workers he'd exploited over the years. Preston's father and grandfather were dead, beyond the reach of earthly justice, but their legacy was destroyed. The Webb family name, once synonymous with Southern luxury and hospitality, would forever be associated with corruption and cruelty. Kate asked me once, after the trial, how I'd stayed so calm through everything, through the investigation, the trial, the media attention. How I'd managed to be patient when I wanted to scream, to demand immediate justice for what had been done to her. I thought about Mama, about those quiet years she'd spent documenting, recording, preserving the truth, about how she'd never expected to see justice in her lifetime, but had worked toward it anyway. Your grandmother taught me something important, I told Kate. She taught me that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just showing up every day, paying attention, remembering. The powerful think they're invisible to us. They think we don't matter, that we don't see, that we won't remember. But that's their weakness. We see everything. We remember everything. And when the time comes, we have the truth. Kate graduated from physical therapy last month. The doctors say she's made a remarkable recovery. She's working now as an advocate for hotel workers' rights, using her experience to help others speak up, to document abuse, to fight back against exploitation. She keeps one of Mama's notebooks on her desk, the one from 1985, where Mama wrote, "They think we're invisible. They're wrong. Invisible people see everything." Sometimes in the evening, I sit in my apartment and think about all those women Mama worked alongside. The ones who were fired, deported, silenced. The ones who suffered because they had no power, no voice, no protection. I think about how Mama honored them by remembering, by documenting, by refusing to let their stories disappear. The truth is the most powerful weapon in the world. That's what Mama knew. That's what she taught me. And patience. Always patience. Because justice doesn't come quickly for people like us. But it comes if you're willing to wait, if you're willing to work, if you're willing to preserve the truth even when it seems like no one will ever care. Preston Webb thought he was untouchable. He thought his family's power, their money, their connections, would protect him forever. He thought the women who cleaned his hotels, who coordinated his events, who made his empire run, were beneath his notice. He was wrong. Mama saw him, I saw him, Kate saw him, and we remembered. That's what he never understood. People like us, we're not invisible. We're watching. We're documenting. We're waiting for the moment when truth matters more than power. And when that moment comes, we're ready. The other day, I got a letter from a woman in Atlanta. She'd heard about the trial, read about Mama's notebooks. She said she'd been working as a housekeeper for 30 years at various hotels. She said she'd been keeping her own records, her own documentation of what she'd witnessed. "I didn't know what to do with it," she wrote. "But now I do. Thank you for showing me that it matters, that we matter." I wrote her back. I told her what Mama used to tell me. Keep watching, keep recording, keep preserving the truth, because someday, someone will need it. Someone will be brave enough to use it. And when that day comes, you'll be ready. That's Mama's legacy. Not just the notebooks that brought down Preston Webb, but the example she set. The reminder that there's power in paying attention, in remembering, in refusing to let injustice be forgotten just because the powerful want it hidden. Kate is talking about starting a foundation. The Sarah Brennan Foundation for Workers' Rights. A place where people can safely document workplace abuse, where they can get legal help, where they can know that their stories matter, that their experiences count, that they're not invisible. I think Mama would like that. I think she'd be proud. Me? I'm just grateful. Grateful that Mama had the courage to start documenting all those years ago. Grateful that Diane had the wisdom to preserve those notebooks. Grateful that Kate survived and found her purpose. Grateful for patient, thorough FBI agents and a lawyer who believed us. Grateful for a justice system that, sometimes, actually works. But most of all, I'm grateful for the lesson Mama taught me, the one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, the one I've passed on to Kate. They think we're invisible. They're wrong. And that's their biggest mistake. Because invisible people see everything, we remember everything, and when the time is right, we act. Preston Webb is in prison now. He'll be there for a long time. And every day he's there, he'll have time to think about all the people he dismissed, all the women he hurt, all the workers he exploited. He'll have time to think about Sarah Brennan, the housekeeper he never noticed, whose careful documentation destroyed everything he'd built. That's justice. That's what patience looks like. That's what truth can do.